Imagine opening your software bill next month and discovering that it's doubled without adding a single new employee. That's a reality many organizations will be starting to face now that GitHub has changed how Copilot is built. If your team uses GitHub Copilot, and chances are it does, something major changed on June 1, 2026. GitHub officially moved from a predictable flat-rate subscription model to a usage-based system called GitHub AI Credits. At first glance, that might not sound like a big deal, but when GitHub released billing previews based on actual usage, many companies got a rude awakening. You see, the concern isn't that developers will run out of AI credits. The real concern is that organizations may suddenly find themselves paying significantly more for the same AI-assisted workflows they relied on before. And if you're leading an engineering team, managing budgets, or responsible for AI adoption inside your company, this change affects you directly. Because the shift from flat rate pricing to consumption-based billing doesn't just change how GitHub charges for Copilot. It changes how you need to think about AI cost management altogether. In this video, I'll break down exactly what changed, why companies are concerned, what the financial impact could look like, and most importantly, what you can do to keep benefiting from AI without watching your software costs spiral out of control. Until about last week, GitHub used a flat-price billing model for Copilot, meaning that you, the user, had the chance to pick a subscription tier for a fixed monthly cost. These tiers typically included unlimited agent mode and chats for cheaper models, as well as a certain number of so-called premium request units, which were basically tokens toward premium models. Every premium model interaction cost 1 PRU. However, the actual cost was then multiplied depending on the power of the AI model used. In practice, it meant that for the end user, a quick chat question and a multi-hour autonomous coding session could basically cost the same amount. This was only possible because GitHub had absorbed much of the increasing inference costs in the background. They did get heavy users from time to time, but so far they have avoided passing the access costs onto the customer. That era is now officially over. Starting June 1, premium request units were replaced by GitHub AI Credits. Instead of a flat price interaction, credits are now consumed based on token usage according to the published API rates for each model. To be clear, the subscription prices themselves have not changed. Copilot Pro remains $10 per month, Pro Plus remains $39 per month, Business remains $19 per user per month, Enterprise remains $39 per user per month. What has changed is how much AI usage those plans include. Instead of receiving a bucket of request units that could be exchanged for AI interactions, subscribers now receive a dollar-denominated balance of AI credits tied to their plan value. As you interact with these models, those credits are consumed in real time based on the underlying API cost. Here is a simplified example. Suppose you are using a premium model such as Claude Opus to run a complex agentic workflow, and each execution generates approximately $1 worth of API costs. Under the old system, the workflow consumed just 3 premium request units, regardless of its actual cost. If your business plan included 300 PRUs, you could run that workflow roughly 100 times before hitting your limit. Under the new system, a $19 business subscription comes with exactly $19 worth of AI credit. If each workflow consumes $1 of AI usage, you'll be able to run it only 19 times before exhausting your included credits and potentially incurring additional charges. That's the fundamental shift. GitHub is moving away from a model where usage was loosely connected to cost to one where usage and cost are directly linked. To understand why this pricing change matters, you need to look at what has happened over the last 2 years. Many large organizations have been aggressively pushing AI adoption across their workforce. Google, for example, has reportedly mandated that software engineers use internal AI tools for coding tasks, with more than 30% of its code now being AI generated. Back in January, McKinsey CEO Bob Sternfeld stated that out of the firm's 600,000 employees, now 25,000 were AI agents. That was a bold statement that appeared to place AI agent and human employees on roughly the same footing. I don't want to get sidetracked debating whether that characterization was fair or even accurate. What it matters is what it tells us about how corporate attitudes toward AI have changed. Companies are no longer treating AI as an interesting experiment. They are trying to embed it into everyday operations. They are redesigning workflows around it. They are measuring adoption, and in some cases, they are making AI usage part of performance expectations. But here's the problem. Just as many of these initiatives are starting to mature, costs are beginning to rise. And that's particularly concerning because most corporate AI initiatives were never profitable to begin with. They were strategic investments, made on the assumption that efficiency gains would gradually materialize over time. The promise was simple: accept higher costs today in exchange for higher productivity tomorrow. But the reality has been much more mixed. In another video, I discussed how many organizations are still struggling to demonstrate clear financial returns on their AI programs. And that's despite the fact that much of the AI transition has effectively been subsidized by the industry itself. GitHub's old premium request unit model is a perfect example. It made experimentation relatively cheap and allowed organizations to build AI-powered workflows without being fully exposed to the true cost of the underlying compute resources. In many ways, it shielded companies from the economics behind the scenes. The new AI credits model changes that. Organizations will now be much more directly exposed to the actual cost of AI usage, and companies that invested heavily in AI-driven workflow transformation without planning for significantly higher long-term operating costs may find themselves in a difficult position. This is especially true for data analytics and operations teams. These are often the teams running the most resource-intensive, multi-step processes that can consume large amounts of tokens and rack up API costs surprisingly quickly. We have already covered what's changing at a high level. Now, let's go one step deeper and look at some practical examples of what GitHub Copilot's new usage-based billing model could mean financially in the real world. I want to walk you through 3 examples based on 3 different types of Copilot users: a casual user, a developer, and finally an agentic user. These 3 examples should give you a realistic picture of where the new pricing model helps, where it hurts, and where costs can potentially explode. Let's start with the average business user. Imagine a data analyst using Copilot chat to explain a piece of code, understand a SQL query, or quickly generate a database script. For this type of workflow, the new pricing model is actually not necessarily bad. Let's say they use Claude Sonnet, one of the more popular models for fast coding tasks. A typical question like, what does this code do together with a small code snippet might use around 400 input tokens, and the response explaining the logic, edge cases, and potential issues might generate another 400 output tokens. The entire interaction costs roughly less than 1 cent. At that rate, a $19 business subscription could cover thousands of these small interactions before the included AI credits are exhausted. Interestingly, this is actually more usage than the old premium request unit model allowed. Under the previous system, the same user might have been limited to roughly 300 premium requests. Even if we increase the workload, for example, a larger code snippet and more detailed explanations, the cost remains relatively small. So for a normal chat-based usage, the average analyst may actually come out ahead. Of course, there's an exception. If credits are pooled at the organizational level, power users could consume a disproportionate amount of the budget and impact everyone else. And that's where things start to get interesting. Developers are a completely different story. They typically don't just ask simple questions. They ask Copilot to rewrite complex logic, debug issues, review architecture, explain dependencies, or modify entire sections of a code base. They also tend to attach multiple files to give the model enough context. This is where costs start accumulating. The biggest factor is not just the size of the prompt, it's the conversation history. Every time you continue a chat, the model needs to process the previous context again. So a conversation that starts small can become expensive surprisingly quickly. Imagine a developer uploads a core execution file plus 2 configuration files to investigate why certain data attributes are being calculated incorrectly. The initial request might involve around 15,000 input tokens, followed by a response containing a proposed fix. That first interaction might cost around 10 cents, not a big deal. But then the developer follows up. Now the model has to process the original file, the previous answer, and the new instructions, and generate an answer. If the average developer interaction costs around 10 cents, you've reached the $19 business plan limit after roughly 190 similar interactions. Compared with the old system, where developers effectively had around 300 premium requests, heavy users may start feeling the difference. And this is still not the worst case. This is where costs can really accelerate. Agentic workflows are fundamentally different because the AI is no longer answering one question. It's actively working through a multi-step process. Imagine an engineer assigns a GitHub issue to an autonomous coding agent. The agent reads the code base, creates a plan, writes changes, runs tests, reads error logs, makes adjustments, and repeats until the task is complete. A single autonomous session can involve hundreds of thousands of tokens. Let's say the agent runs a complex 10-step workflow using a premium reasoning model. The session might consume around 800,000 input tokens and 10,000 output tokens. At API pricing, that single run could cost around $4. Now, imagine that engineer runs this workflow twice a week. One developer alone could generate more than $32 per month in AI usage. That's already above the $19 business subscription price. Scale that to a 50-person engineering team, and the predictable $950 monthly Copilot bill can become more than $1,600. Almost a 70% increase, and that comes from only one workflow used twice a week. If teams start running agents daily, working with huge repositories or chaining multiple agents together, costs can increase very quickly. And that's the real takeaway. The new pricing model doesn't hurt every user equally. Light users may barely notice. Heavy users, especially those running agentic workflows, are where organizations need to pay attention. So the final question becomes, how do companies keep the benefits of AI adoption without letting costs spiral out of control? The good news is that does not mean organizations need to slow down on AI adoption, but they do need to start managing AI differently. The first and most obvious step is implementing spending limits. Once the included AI credit pool is exhausted, you can simply cap additional spending. It sounds simple, but it can create problems if configured incorrectly. The important thing to understand is how GitHub handles credits by default. AI credits are not automatically split evenly between users. Instead, your organization receives one shared pool, and every user consumes from that same budget. This is one major advantage: you avoid stranded capacity. In other words, a light user who barely touches Copilot does not waste credits while a heavy user runs out. There's also a downside, unfortunately. A few power users or even a single runaway agent workflow could consume a large portion of the company's monthly allocation. In the worst case scenario, Copilot could effectively stop working for everyone until the next building cycle. The good news is that this can be managed. GitHub provides more granular controls. You can set budgets at the enterprise level, team or cost center level, and even individual user level. And this is something organizations should seriously consider implementing, because the goal is not to block users from using AI. The goal is to prevent one person or one workflow accidentally consuming the entire company's AI budget. The second important change is the mindset. Companies need to start treating AI compute the same way they treat cloud infrastructure. Nobody would give every employee unlimited AWS or Azure spending and check the bill once a year. AI should be managed the same way. Someone needs ownership, someone needs to monitor usage, someone needs to review the billing dashboard regularly and look for unusual spikes. But more importantly, companies need to change how they measure success. The question is no longer how many AI requests did we run. The real question is, what value did those requests create? AI costs need to be evaluated based on business outcomes, not just API consumption. The third and final piece is education. Teams need to understand that the smartest model is not always the best model. Under the old flat rate system, many developers naturally gravitated toward the most powerful available model because the cost difference was hidden. In a usage-based world, that should change. Using a frontier model for every task is like taking a Ferrari to drive 100 meters down the street. Sometimes you need a Ferrari, but most of the time, a much cheaper option gets the job done. Teams need to learn how to match the model to the complexity of the problem. Use smaller, cheaper models for simple tasks and reserve the expensive reasoning models for problems that actually require them. The same principle applies to context management. Remember, you pay for every token the model processes. If an engineer gives AI an entire code base when it only needs 2 files, they are paying for thousands of unnecessary tokens. Good context hygiene is one of the easiest ways to reduce AI costs without reducing productivity. And in many cases, giving the model less information actually produces better results because the AI can focus on the relevant details. And the future of AI in enterprise is probably not about using less AI. It is about using AI intelligently. Because the companies that win will not be the ones that spend the most on AI. They will be the ones that get the highest value from every dollar they spend. I would end it here. If you enjoyed the video, consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more content.